Hi, we're here at GOTO Chicago, and I know Corey and I have the pleasure of talking with Tim Bray, who did a fantastic keynote last evening, and we'll be looking forward to the video of that coming out. And those of you that are heading to go to Denmark and Copenhagen and Aarhus will have a chance to hear Tim there.
Yeah, so welcome, Tim.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad you could come. So I've been wondering if I could start, and then you can have a question later. You know, there's a lot of people talking about how much the IT community has given to them, and they want to give something back to the IT community. And we all know that you have given XML to the community. But what would you say yourself was what's the biggest thing that you have given back to the IT community?
Oh gosh, you know, I always have to stop and make this point, and I'm sorry because some people have heard it a few times, but I didn't invent XML, okay?
Yeah.
There were 11 people on the working group, there were 100 people on the interest group supporting it, there were 3 co-editors. I was the loudest mouth, I was the big loud mouth, I was the chief marketing officer for XML.
But you were part of it, right?
I was clearly part of it, yeah. I guess.
Co-responsible.
In retrospect, I guess, XML is probably the biggest stake I put in the ground in terms of helping the internet community. But I've done a lot of other extra little things. Been working in the IATF and the W3C, and even ISO. May God forgive me, a bit over the years. And but I think, I'm not entirely out of energy yet, and really it's been awfully good to me. The internet and this profession's been awfully good to me, and I'd like to really, I've done enough careers. I don't need another career, but I'd still like to make some contributions. I'm teaching a course now for the first time in my life. Well, I think I've done it before, but not for decades, and that's kind of appealing.
Yeah.
I think there's still lots more work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
I'm terrifically interested in the issues of privacy and confidentiality, and I think that we really owe it. Those of us who are building the apps and getting paid for it, really owe it to the community to dig deep and take better care of people's privacy and push back against those who would compromise it.
Yes, I hear a lot of people saying that around the conferences right now, that IT people really do have a huge responsibility, because we're building so much of what people's normal lives are using all the time.
Absolutely, and there are some big low-hanging fruit that people should be doing in the short term. For example, anybody who's listening to this who has an application, does your application work over HTTPS? Even better, does it work over only HTTPS with nothing ever sent in plain text? Well, it should. And that's something that anybody can get to with a little bit of extra work and a little bit of extra money. And it seems to me that the benefits of doing that, massively exceed the cost and inconvenience. And there's, once we get past that, there's lots of other things. We can start taking better care of people's passwords. We can stop using passwords where possible. We can have really clear, clean privacy policies. We can set up our apps so that they don't lock people in, lock people's data in. There's a lot we could be doing.
Yes.
A question that's a more technical question. I actually do applaud your remarks, because I think it's really just like essentially asserting that you have a bug in your program if you don't support HTTPS, right? Basically, it just shouldn't work, right?
Right.
So, JSON's the new XML, if you want, in some respects. But those of us that deal with systems over a long time, and those of us with the billions or trillions of JSON data, or XML data for that matter, without any kind of schema description, we're stuck in a world of parsing and guessing. Do you have any comment on binary? The two questions there. One is shouldn't there be some sort of schema applied in general? I mean, there are proposals. Don't you think there's some sort of description so that when people add and drop attributes as they're storing click streams?
Well, I'm definitely of two minds. It is clearly the case that there are certain situations where having a schema can be helpful, if only because the process of writing down the schema forces you to think in a clear, logically constrained way about, what actually can go into your language or your interchange format. But, I got a note that JSON doesn't have one, and it seems to be doing okay, it's not holding it back. I've actually argued in the IETF that when you're designing protocols, things, APIs and protocols, that schemas can be actively harmful. And that's because I think that when you're defining a protocol, the most important thing you need is a clear prose description written, by humans for humans of what the fields are and what their semantics are. And that's way more important. Next, the most important thing after that is some nice open source validation software that will, look at a message that purports to be a member of this protocol and say yeah or no. And that's because schemas, by their very nature, are not going to be able to test for, really important conditions like, is that a valid telephone number or something like that. A schema can't tell you. You have to go and look elsewhere. So schemas can be self-defeating in that I've seen people, invest so much money, so much time and effort in schema engineering that they neglect to, write down in clear terms what they mean by an update message.
Sure, in Erlang you basically specify the type signatures, but you also, for the protocol, you specify a state machine. Mm-hmm. So, plus you have a textual narrative for it. That's
right.
A pretty effective technique for
But you really need to
protocol.
hold the whip to people and make sure that they write the textual narrative down that is coherent and comprehensible. And I would say for all the criticisms of the IETF, over the years the IETF's actually done a pretty good job of that, of making sure that people really write down, what that bit pattern means.
No, I think the reference implementation is really an excellent point, because a reference implementation that's good, that people can test against, really, I think makes a living standard as opposed to a...
Oh, you're right. And my narrative of what's important in a specification, I mentioned the narrative, which is the most important thing, and I mentioned the reference implementation, but I didn't mention examples, which are actually equally as important, because the vast majority of people, when told to implement that RFC, they skip over all the pros and they just go straight to the example and say, okay, I'll build one that looks like that. I do that, sure. Anyhow. And so having, good, clear examples is also terribly, terribly important.
What's your views on binary data formats versus textual?
Oh, I think textual data formats are immensely preferable in almost every circumstance. I mean, there are exceptions. For example, your IPv4 and IPv6 headers are bit patterns, and you can make a case that in that particular, since they are so ubiquitous, in every packet that goes over the internet, the few extra bytes you save on the payload are worthwhile, and the lack of processing overhead. But there have been proposals for binary implementations to both JSON and XML, and I just tend to not be impressed because, first of all, I haven't actually seen very convincing proof that it would actually reduce the size of the payload very much. If you actually look at the real work, the payload doesn't shrink very much. And secondly, they say, well, it'll parse faster. Well, prove that to me, because I don't believe it. Parsing is a very well understood issue in computer science. We're good at it.
But inherently sequential.
I suppose, but in my experience is that the runtime of both XML and JSON parsers is dominated by memory management, right? By allocating the stuff that you need to store the implicit tree or whatever that's in there. It's not dominated by the process of running through but you're right, for something like an IPv6 header, you can look immediately at the 28th bit to see, if it's priority writing or something like that. Having said that, I tend to be very, very skeptical of demands for binary payloads in general.
Another question, Ronald?
No, I think we're out of time.
We're running out of time.
Excellent. Look forward to seeing everybody in Denmark this autumn.
Thanks very much, Tim.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.